Thank you very much, everyone, for inviting me to speak here today, firstly, and thank you so much for making time for me on a Friday night. I'm glad to see Europe students very interested in climate action. So just a few words on who I am. My name is Jérémy Herry. I'm an information and communication officer working at the European Commission's Directorate General for Climate Action. So the European Commission has a number of different directorate generals working on different topics. The one I work at focuses on climate action. And so I was invited to speak here today and wanted to tell you first a bit about climate change, about the EU's action on climate change, and about what you can do. Now I'll go on. Right, so firstly, about climate change. Obviously, you've all heard of climate change. It's one of the hottest topics of the last few years, no pun intended. It's the past decade, from 2011 to 2020, was the warmest decade ever recorded. The climate crisis is causing, without exaggerating, is causing death, it's causing injury, it's causing the destruction of infrastructure through floods, wildfires, droughts, and so on and so forth. And now, I'd like to explain to you a little bit of the science behind climate change, so how it all works. So climate change is caused by what's called the greenhouse effect. So a greenhouse is the greenhouse effect is when there are gases that are emitted into the atmosphere, such as carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide. And due to the accumulation of these gases in the atmosphere around the world, the heat of the sun goes into the atmosphere, but it's trapped and it cannot come out, as if you were in a similar to the effect of a greenhouse in a garden. And over the years, in particular since the Industrial Revolution, there's been an increasing accumulation of these greenhouse gases, which increases the way in which the sun's heat is trapped in the atmosphere. So when people talk about greenhouse gases, you hear a lot about carbon dioxide, CO2, which makes sense because about 3/4 of greenhouse gases are carbon dioxide, which are in the atmosphere at the moment. But there's also methane, nitrous oxide, and fluorinated gases. So these greenhouse gases are being emitted in the atmosphere through the burning of fossil fuels primarily. That's coal, oil, and gas in a range of different uses, in particular transport and heating. Then there's deforestation, so which in itself is not. It's not a fuel, but it's rather reducing the world's capacity to absorb the greenhouse gases. There's also livestock farming, which is driving deforestation, but on top of that, increasing methane emissions. Fertilizers which use nitrogen, such as which produces nitrous oxide, and fluorinated gases, which you can find in air conditioning, in spray cans, and so on. And so some of these gases, such as fluorinated gases, even though they're in a smaller amount than CO2, their warming effect can be up to 23,000 times greater than CO2. So it's still important. Now, so those are the causes. Now, about the consequences. So on paper, this is what it looks like. You may have heard of the 1.5 degree or 2 degree scenario. Those are numbers that we hear a lot. So what that means, it corresponds to the 1.5 degrees or 2 degrees Celsius of increase in the warming of the Earth's global annual average surface temperature compared to pre-industrial levels. So you can see on the graph that it's clearly going up, and there's you can see the black line on top where it says 1.5. We need to make sure that it doesn't go above that line, because once it does go above that line, the consequences, even though we're already seeing the consequences today, at current levels of heating, above that line, it gets much more serious. And that's the scientifically proven. It's not just guesswork. It's the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which gives recommendations on these things, and according to their findings, unless there are really immediate reductions in greenhouse gas emissions, which limit, we will not be able to reach 1.5. I mean, we will not be able to stay below, rather 1.5 degrees or even 2 degrees. That's really important in that sense, to reduce emissions and also to adapt to the consequences of climate change. That's something that's very important for us at the Commission, is that we're not only looking to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but we also want to adapt our infrastructure, our ways to a world that is becoming increasingly warm. Now, specifically on the ground, what happens if there isn't sufficient action? There's predictions of 400,000 premature deaths per year due to air pollution, 90,000 annual deaths due to heat waves, hundreds of millions forcibly displaced due to places simply becoming uninhabitable, because that's one of the the most clear effects of climate change, is that in effect it's making more and more places on Earth become uninhabitable. And so if the place is uninhabitable, of course people will have to leave. And also a grave effect on wildlife, with 16% of species at risk of extinction as well. Now, one of the ways to categorize the consequences of climate change can be to see firstly sort of the natural threats. So there's the physical effect of the sun's heat being trapped in the atmosphere, and then that leads to extreme heat, droughts, wildfires, lack of fresh water, floods, lots of extreme natural events, and these in turn also lead to other consequences. In the second one, social threats, so health threats, because, for instance, due to the increasing heat in certain parts of the world, you will have, let's say, mosquitoes that carry malaria will have access to a much larger territory, and so that's one of the health threats as well, and others who are not animal-based diseases too. Some populations, such as the elderly, are particularly vulnerable to heat waves, as I'm sure you know, due to dehydration and being more at risk in these situations. And also in employment at work, there's a risk due to, let's say, reaching certain safety thresholds, where if you're at a certain reach a certain temperature, it can be, quite frankly, difficult to, or even impossible to work, especially if you've got, if you're working in a position that involves manual labor, for instance. Same goes if there's a storm or other events and so on. The climate crisis is a huge threat to business as well. Some businesses more obviously than others, such as tourism, for instance. You can imagine that it's in the tourism industry's interest to make sure that the sea levels do not rise, and that temperatures remain acceptable. Same for agriculture, which beyond being a business sector also feeds the world's feeds the world, which is of critical importance too. And yes, then there are a number of territorial threats. So different parts of Europe have different, are more threatened by different things. So, for instance, in Northern Europe, there are predictions for less snow and ice, greater storms, more frequent extreme weather. Whereas, let's say, for instance, in Central and Eastern Europe, there's a greater focus, a greater risk of floods in winter and spring. Right, so that's for the background on what climate change is and what its causes and consequences are. Now, more specifically on what the EU is doing. So, the European Green Deal. In 2019, the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, announced her agenda for Europe, and the European Green Deal is one of the 6 Commission priorities for her presidency. And the Executive Vice President, Frans Timmermans, from the Netherlands, is the Commissioner in charge of this portfolio. So the European Green Deal is a deal to improve the quality of life of current and future generations, and to make sure that we have a livable future in Europe and in this world. It covers a vast number of topics, from clean energy to industry to making homes efficient, agriculture, protecting nature, and the one, I would say, overarching specific goal of the European Green Deal is for the EU to become climate neutral by 2050. So what does that mean? Climate neutrality means that we want to reduce greenhouse gas emissions as much as possible, and also compensate for any remaining emissions. I'm sorry for the noise. Also compensate for any remaining emissions by 2050. The idea is to reach some zero emissions, where perhaps you'd have some remaining emissions, but thanks to the absorption from more forestry, you would be able to reach climate neutrality. So that's our long-term goal for 2050. But in order to reach that in 2050, well, we can't just start in 2049. So we've got some intermediary goals as well. Now, the next main intermediary goal is 2030, by when we want to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 55%. So that was in July last year, the Commission adopted a set of proposals to make a number of policies appropriate for this goal. Now, when I say the Commission adopted that, I'm just going to tell you a bit how it works. So within the European Union, you've got the European Commission, the European Parliament, and the Council of the European Union. So the European Commission proposes laws and policies. Then the European Parliament, which is made up of directly elected members, votes upon them, as well as the Council of the European Union, which is made up of the different representatives of the EU's government, the governments of the EU's 27 member states. And so to reach this target of reducing our emissions by 55%, we've got several proposals on lots of different topics, as you can see here, because climate change just concerns so many aspects of our lives and of our society. Now, transport, for instance, very important topic, because, as I'm sure you know, as I was saying earlier, the main driver of climate change is fossil fuels, and they are primarily used in transport. So our goal is to reduce emissions from cars by 2030 by 55%, by vans by 50%, and by 2035 we have set the target of 0 emissions. That means we are phasing out the internal combustion engine. So all new cars by 2035 would have to be 0 emission cars. Now, on our energy system, obviously a central issue. So we have set a new renewable energy target for 2030 by 40%. So that was actually the target we set last year. Since then, we've increased it to 45%, given the situation with Russia's aggression in Ukraine. I'll tell you a bit more about that later. And our new 2030 energy efficiency target for final and primary energy consumption is also at 36 to 39%. Now, nature plays a fundamental part. It's intimately linked with the climate crisis, since it's a natural physical phenomenon that we're dealing with here, and the restoration of our natural world helps absorb CO2, and therefore helps with climate action, and which is why what we want to do is to plant at least 3 billion more trees in the EU by 2030. That would help absorb a vast amount of CO2 from the atmosphere. We've increased our target. You can see on the picture, our new target is for 310 megatons, and this is on top of our work to restore the EU's soils and peatlands, which is also done through certain projects that the EU funds. Now, buildings, another central point, in particular due to heating, and so we want to reduce the energy consumptions of buildings, and in order to do that, one of the things we want to do is set up the new social climate fund. So this social climate fund will provide financial support to the most vulnerable people in Europe, in the form of helping them renovate their homes and also have access to greener mobility. We propose that member states renovate at least 3% of the total floor area of all public buildings, also set a benchmark of 49% of renewables for the energy used in buildings by 2030, and requiring member states to increase the use of renewable energy in heating and cooling by 1.1 percentage points each year. Now, as I was talking about the Social Climate Fund, so on top of that, we also want to highlight that the green transition has the potential to create around 1 million jobs by 2030, good jobs in construction and manufacturing in particular, which should be here in Europe instead of jobs in fossil fuels elsewhere. And to be more specific about the Social Climate Fund, it will mobilise 72.2 billion euros from 2025 to 2032. Now, in 2 days, COP27 will begin. So that's the Conference of Parties on Climate Change. It's the international climate change event of the year, where all states come together to negotiate and cooperate on climate action. So it's going to take place in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt this year, next week. And so what we want to do there is to push for more ambitious action on climate change globally. So the thing is, even though let's say all emissions all over the world impact us all wherever we are. I mean, if you could, fossil fuels that are burnt here in Europe impact, let's say Australia, same the other way around. Once they're in the atmosphere, it doesn't make a difference. So in that sense, it's important to work together, because as long as if we just work alone on this, it's not going to work. So that's why this is a very important part of our work, and part of it is also supporting those member states which may have maybe in a more vulnerable position, and the EU and its 27 countries are actually the biggest contributor to public climate finance for developing countries. So we committed 23 billion euros in 2020. Now, to tell you something about a plan called Repower EU. So in February this year, as everyone knows, Russia launched its war on Ukraine, and as a consequence of that, also weaponized its fossil fuels, using them as political and economic weapons. And now, in the European Union's pursuit of energy security, we are dedicated to pursuing the green transition, because they help each other. And so our plan to do that is called Repower EU. It's based on 3 pillars: saving energy, producing clean energy, and diversifying our energy supplies. And through those 3 pillars, we aim to break free from Russian fossil fuels. Now, here are just a few examples of the proposals in the Repower EU plan. So we want, as I was telling you earlier, we want to increase the renewables target for 2030 from 40 to 45%. Want to increase the amount of photovoltaic by 2025 to 320 gigawatts, which is more than double it is now. And we want to reach 600 gigawatts by 2030. We propose faster permitting for renewable projects, legislation and recommendations for that, and a hydrogen accelerator by 2025 to boost homegrown production of renewable hydrogen. These are just some of the many proposals on the REPowerEU. Now, on a new point, the European Climate Pact. So this is about what you can do. The Commission launched the European Climate Pact in 2020 to engage citizens in climate action. And so the European Climate Pact is a movement and also a way for EU citizens to show their commitment to climate action, to connect with other citizens, and to play a role in their community, whichever that may be, in getting the word out on the need to act and also how to act and to build a more sustainable Europe, connect people, make change, and raise awareness. So you could say that in terms of awareness in the EU, we're lucky that the awareness is high. So let's say, according to a survey we made last year, 93% of Europeans believe that climate change is a serious problem. 96% have taken at least one action to tackle climate change, and 90% agree that greenhouse gas emissions should be reduced to make the EU climate neutral by 2050, which is great. But then we also need to transform that knowledge and that clear will of the European people to act on the climate into actual steps. And many people might want to act, but they don't necessarily know what to do, or they might be looking for guidance on these matters, which is where the European Climate Pact comes in. So if you join the pact, you can be a Climate Pact ambassador. If you're a leader in a community, in an organization, and as a Climate Pact ambassador, you commit to making your community more sustainable, and also raising awareness of climate matters. You can also be a friend of the European Climate Pact, which is open to everybody residing in the European Union, and you have a similar role, and where you can also make pledges, which might be, let's say, a pledge to increase the number of times you cycle, pledge to reduce food waste, to insulate your home, and there's also the option of organizing peer parliament, which is a grouping of people in your community where you can get together and discuss how would you like to see the climate transition take place concretely in your community. And the European Commission provides you with tools, guidance, and resources to be able to put these things in place. And we also provide you with the network of Climate Pact ambassadors and friends, so that you can sort of raise each other up. And so, yes, I mean, we want to get the climate conversation going, not just from us, but also at citizen level. And sometimes it's easier for people to understand the climate emergency when it comes from a friend or another person rather than from an institution. And we've already got 3 million pledges, which is great, and we're still hoping to grow, which, according to our calculations, has helped deliver 10 million kilos of reduction in CO2 equivalent, and we've got almost 800 ambassadors already. So thank you so much for listening to me and for paying attention to the EU's action on climate change and climate science. I hope it was useful for you, and I hope you learned something. Now, I'm very happy to answer any questions you may have. I might not know all the answers off the top of my head, but I'm happy to try. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. I see a lot of clapping hands already in our Zoom round. It's also very nice that you take the time at a Friday night to open up for questions. So to open this all up, you already touched upon the current geopolitical conflicts that we see in Europe, but this is much broader, right? We also see a lot of conflicts right now in the Far East. We see China and Taiwan. We also see a high activity of North Korea again. We see a lot of countries also here in the US, which are aware of all the climate issues that we currently face. However, it seems that with all the current tensions going on, it seems not on top of our agenda. But we might pay the price for this in about 20 years, as you said, and even further in the future. So I think the program, the ambassador program that you just introduced, is a very nice opportunity for us. And the question I would have now to start the whole Q&A round off a little would be, what do you think can we actually do to not just increase the education, but also to kind of solidify the position of the climate plans on the agenda of all countries? Because in the end, acting alone will not put you better off, right? It has to be a team effort.
Yes, no, you're absolutely right. So if I understood the question correctly, so you're asking what can citizens do at their level, not just to raise awareness, but also to make sure that governments and institutions keep their word. Is that
exactly? And also it kind of on a global level or on a transnational level, how can we actually establish a commitment of all the companies and of all the countries and the government to their goals?
Yes. So on your last point first. So at COP27, which is starting next week, that is really the moment of the year, even though it's not. It follows long negotiations and talks, but it's the moment of the year where all countries really get together to address the issue of climate change. The EU is going there and will be pushing for ambitious climate action from everyone, and also trying to convey the importance of working together, because it is an issue which can only work via cooperation. You can't just go at it alone. So, which is also, I think a lot of countries understand this, which is why the COPs actually take place and why the Paris Agreement was signed in 2015, in which over 190 countries committed to climate action. Now, there's also the COP27 is within the framework of the United Nations, and it's they pass they have agreements there. It's a sort of they pass resolutions, and it's not very easy to get over 190 states to agree on something, especially given that they don't all have the same what could you say, the same impression of emergency, perhaps, or the same interests when it comes to the causes of climate change. Now, I suppose one of the main challenges is really pushing for a cooperative approach rather than a competitive one, even though competitiveness to some respect can help if people are competitive in being the most ambitious in climate, then that's great. But yeah, it's a challenge for sure. But the EU's is going to Sharm el Sheikh next week to push things in the right direction, and not just negotiating, but also providing concrete support. Like I think I mentioned earlier, where the EU is the world's top donor in climate finance for vulnerable and developing nations, where they might not have as much capacity to act, even though they're particularly vulnerable. Now, on your first point, so yes, raising awareness is one thing. It's important for people to be aware of, well, what climate change is, what the governments are doing. But I think by showing your commitment, and by, let's say, everybody demonstrating that climate change is an important topic to them, well, then our leaders see that, okay, well, climate change is important, we better get this right because people care about this. And so that's one of that's where the mandate to act comes from. It's from citizens showing that it matters, which is why I can absolutely understand that the will to say, so what, awareness is there, what do we do now? But the truth is, unfortunately, even though many people are aware of the reality of climate change, there's still a lot of work to do in terms of accepting the change of, so let's say, all right, I want to act against climate change, but I still want to have 3 cars and take the plane every week. So, you know, is that I'm caricaturing, but it's that's part of the challenge as well. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I see a couple of hands raised, so I have a follow-up question, which I beg you to be quick on the answer so that we can also
sure. No, of course.
the other questions. What do you think for the COP27 next week? What would be the best case headlines that we could read in Bloomberg and like Financial Times, etc.? And what will be the headlines which we actually have to expect?
Right, that's a good question. I mean, best headline would be everybody agrees on so I work in communication, so I should be better at finding a good headline, but everybody would be, okay, all the world's nations commit to specific emission reduction targets and adaptation targets to succeed in becoming climate neutral by 2050 and keeping a 1.5 keeping below 1.5 degrees rather. That keeping below 1.5 degrees. I mean, if that were achieved, that would be good. And for a bad headline, I mean, I suppose anything that says if we can't work together, well, then that's just that just doesn't help. Let's say.
Yeah. Okay, Lucas, I think you're next, right?
No, I think Julian was next, but I just continue. So I have a quite complex question, but we can shorten it a little bit. So I wonder why the benchmarks in the use of renewables are so conservative, and why it does take so long to establish renewables, because they are a great opportunity to drive the fight against climate change. but full use of renewables still seems extremely far away if you look at, I think what you said were 45% in 2025.
That's right. So 40%, no, yes, 45% of renewables by then. Well, I mean, it's when you look at the past, it's quite a huge difference, and it's also one of the most ambitious targets in the entire world. But I mean, I can understand the will to go further. Definitely, it's just that one of the difficulties is that we always have to, well, we have to balance our, let's say, we want to achieve this target, but is it doable? You know, we need to make sure that we don't want to overpromise what we can do. So that's important as well. And we when we set these targets, they're based on an assessment of the current situation and of what we believe we can achieve, because we don't, well, again, we don't want to let's say, we don't want to say, okay, we're going to get 100% renewables next year, and then, well, how are we going to do that? That's why we sort of find, I wouldn't say a compromise, but a sort of middle ground to see, okay, what's the best we can achieve? It's that, okay, let's do it.
All right. Lucas, if you do not have a follow-up on that, I would hand the word over to Julian.
Yes. All right. Thank you, Jeremy, that you have take time today. Which executive position should take the EU, the European Commission, and its governments when it comes to the transition, and which position should have companies and our citizens? So what I want to say, do we need a strong state, a strong framework, and people follow up and say, okay, the government says we want to achieve that, and the government says, okay, please do this, that, and whatever? Or do we need more freedom, more freedom and more
like
diversity in the actions?
Like more corporate social responsibility.
Yes, for example, yeah.
Well, that's a great question, which is philosophical and practical at the same time. So I would say the approach at the European Union is to have a mix, in the sense that we've established that the climate crisis is an emergency. That is the case. It's a very serious emergency, and we need to do everything we can to prevent it from getting worse. So in that sense, there are certain aspects that we think should be law. It should be the law to reduce the EU's emissions by 55% by 2030, because if we do not, then it's going to be a catastrophe, quite frankly. So if something's very serious, it has, to that extent, it has to be the law. Now, in terms of how we get there, in terms of whose decision it is to make certain things, of course, then it's up to everyone to a certain respect. Like, for instance, on heating at home, I mean, we need to save energy. It would definitely help for people to turn down their thermostat by a few degrees, but we're not telling people how many degrees they have to heat their homes. That's for everyone to decide. But we're still offering guidance and offering the science and the facts, and saying, if you do this, that will happen. If you don't do this, this will happen. Now on companies specifically, we're very proud to support companies in the climate transition. There's a fund called the Innovation Fund, which provides grants for companies that innovate in climate technology. So it's several tens of billions of euros, which are collected not from the EU budget, but from revenues from polluters, because there's a system called the EU emissions trading system, which means, so this system covers certain certain economic activities, such as steel, paper, certain aspects of aviation, certain very energy intensive activities, and they are allowed to emit a certain amount of greenhouse gases per year overall. And if they can choose to buy allowances from and sell allowances with each other to be able to stay within the limit, because if they go beyond the limit, then they get a fine. And so the money from these extra allowances and fines goes to funding innovative tech. So which in which way we have, I would say, more of a encouraging position towards companies in that sense, while also keeping, I believe, common sense laws to make sure there are no excesses. I hope I answered your question.
I think so, yes. So Tizian, please go ahead.
Oh, thanks. I think committing to a goal is one part, but taking action, really action, is the other one. In your, or through your work for the Commission, I think you read lots of papers and data, especially of the macros, so different countries. We in our German bubble hear a lot of our own stuff. Yeah. This week, the Climate Expert Commission for Germany said that we have to do more efforts in order to keep our own goals, because we set some more. So I asked myself, or now you, how it is with the other countries or the EU at all, how realistic it is to reach these main goal in 2050 and the tinier ones on the way there. What your own opinion is, and maybe how different countries can help each other, because not everyone has the economic strength or the system that it needs to get this done.
Yes, well, first on your last point first, so there's that's absolutely true. I mean, not all countries start from the same, let's say, base in terms of where they are in regarding emissions and the capacity to transition their infrastructure. So we have a fund called the Modernization Fund, which supports 10 of the most vulnerable EU member states in upgrading their energy and electricity systems. It's funded by the European Commission and by the European Investment Bank, and so that's one thing in countries helping each other through the via the European Union. Then on reaching goals and how to get there and being realistic, well, I do believe that our goal for 2050 is realistic. It was certainly, I mean, come back to your the other participants' question, remark earlier that the renewables target was too low. I mean, there are some people who think it's going too quickly. Some people think it's going too slowly. But in our opinion, yes, it's realistic. We need to go as quickly as we can and as well as slowly as is necessary. But what was I going to say? The fact of the matter is, we are in an emergency, because if we don't take action, things will only get worse. I mean, we can't just say, okay, tired of this climate change thing, let's just do something else. Climate change is still going to happen anyway. I mean, that's the issue. Sometimes, unfortunately, there are no perfect solutions. I mean, it's a mix. And on your point about, so you were saying you heard that in your country, citizens were being asked to make efforts, and how it was in other countries. So I don't know about the situation in terms of what is being asked in terms of efforts at member state level from the governments to the citizens. But it's true that there are very different, let's say, situations from one state to another. It's very interesting. Like, for instance, in Finland, I learned recently that there are more saunas than cars in the country, and so that's an issue in terms of the climate transition there. That's one of the things that might be more in their minds, rather than in Germany, which has a strong car culture. Quite certainly the issue will be cars. And in Finland, yes, I would say there are more saunas than cars. 60% of Finns go to the sauna once a week. So it's and so every country has its own sort of burning issue, and it also shows that there's a cultural part to the climate transition as well, which is where the European Climate Pact comes in, where citizens can speak with each other and in their own community try to get people on board.
Very good answer. I think, Hannah, you're the next one, then Jan, and then we also have one question in chat. I don't know how much time you have left, Jérémy. So
yeah, I'll make time. If we have 3 questions left, that's fine. I'll make time for the 3.
Easy. Okay, Hannah, please.
I think Jan was before me, so I give him a chance first.
You can surely make that question. I can wait. No.
Okay, so if you don't mind, sorry. So I actually have 2 questions. We currently see like a rise in populism in Europe, for instance, just to name a few: Sweden, Italy, Hungary, and stuff. Would you say, is there any opportunity we can overcome the divergence that some nations are more willing to reduce their climate emissions than others?
Well, I wouldn't want to comment on member states' internal affairs too much, but what I can say is that within the European Union, all member states are working together to act on climate. And at COP27, for instance, all member states will be there, and also represented by the European Union, which is going to act with the full force of its member states behind it. So in that sense, as long as member states are members of the European Union, they're still contributing to climate action in that sense. So yeah, that's my answer.
Okay, thank you. Just a little follow-up question there concerning the COP27. Is there, like, as far as I'm concerned, some regions like in Africa or Asia are going to be heavily affected by climate change as opposed to like Western nations? Is there any chance that the Green Deal or the COP provides any opportunity to help those very affected regions as well?
Yes, absolutely. Well, at the European Commission, we do recognise that there are countries that are certainly in a more vulnerable position and have less capacity to act, which is why we're proud to be the world's #1 top donor in climate finance, donating 23 billion euros. I think it was. I saw that earlier. I wrote the number down. I don't want to tell you anything that isn't accurate. Just one second. It was yes, committing 23.4 billion euros in 2020 of public climate finance for developing economies, and that is so our approach is twofold. So we fund climate action measures globally, focusing on the poorest and most vulnerable countries and communities. And we also use grant support to leverage private investment, so financing from international development banks and so forth.
So we see that some of the real big players such as China, India, or Saudi Arabia have rather low goals, such as climate neutral until 2060, or for India even 2070. Do you believe that with goals like that, we can even reach the target of 1.5%? And if not, are states like that able to set more ambitious goals and reach these?
Well, I think it's our job to try and convince them that they should have more ambitious targets. And that's also why we're going to COP27, to try to get everyone on board the climate train. I mean, it's true, they're different parts of the world. We don't all have the same targets. Which makes sense. Everyone comes from a different baseline, but what we're doing is we're following the science, and the science says if we don't reach 1.5, I mean, sorry, if we do reach 1.5, then it's really not going to be good, and so that's why we're, on the basis of science, we're trying to convince all our partners over the world to join us in the pursuit of a livable future, because that's what it's about at the end of the day.
Thank you.
True, yeah, although this might not always be easy. Now the last question is from the chat, is from Garrett. And he wants to know whether you think the European Green Deal is actually successful or will have a bright future.
Right. Well, I mean, it's still in progress. I think we're certainly moving forward. And as I was explaining earlier, it's not always very easy to understand that. So the European Commission proposes laws and legislation, and then it's up to the European Parliament and Council, which is the governments of each EU member state, to vote upon them. So so far, I think it's going in the right direction, yes, and I think it will have a bright future because it has to. we cannot fail. The Green Deal cannot fail. So in that sense, I'm optimistic.
I think that's very promising closing words. So again, from me and I think everyone else in the meeting, thank you so much for taking time tonight. I really appreciate it. Thank you for the great and extending answers on all the questions. I think you gave us great insight. Yeah. Anything else from you? This is now the time.
No, well, I mean, thank you very much to you all. I was really glad to be able to speak with you tonight, and I have to say I'm impressed at the. I see you've done your research. I'm impressed at the questions, and yeah, I'd just like to ask. So, Meld, how did it start? Can you? And also, is it a reference to Star Trek, to the Vulcans, or not?
Very cool questions. Okay, so I'll give you the quick story. Meld started basically in 2020. There's something called the Economy Camp of a German foundation, which unites 30 German and 30 US students, originally in Hamburg, funnily, to discuss the pressing questions of our time and what our generation can actually do to kind of make an effort or a successful effort to solve them. Now, this camp only lasts for a couple of days, and some friends and me, we said, hey, it's so sad that this format already ends after 2 or 3 days. This should be continuous. And so, inspired by the pandemic, we said, let's do this online. Let's continue, meet every 2 weeks, discuss the pressing issues. And then we went on and said, hey, let's have some speakers. So from time to time, we welcome some speakers in our round and just take the input from there and take it further and discuss whatever piques our interests. Now, the reference to Star Trek was initially not intended. However, I think it is a very nice interpretation of our name. So yeah, this is individual and everyone can interpret what they want, but we will not claim any rights on that.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Well, thanks so much. Thank you, David, Lucas, Julian, everyone else. And I'm gonna leave you now. But it was great speaking, and yeah, stay in touch. And if you want more information or any clarifications or whatever, please feel free to send me an email. You've got my contacts, so, and you can. I know a few of you have shared the thing on LinkedIn. Feel free to follow as well. I post some stuff there every so often on European climate action.
Cool. So if you're fine, we will share your contact details with our members. And,
sure.
Occasionally, somebody will drop you a message.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Have a great weekend.
Bye. You too.
Bye.